He recognized the man within 30 seconds. Not a suspicion, not a flicker of familiarity. A certainty that arrived the way a name comes back to you in the middle of the night, sudden and complete and impossible to unknow. The man was standing at the whiteboard, marker in hand, explaining the department's quarterly structure. He was relaxed. He had the practiced ease of someone who ran a lot of meetings. He had no idea Marcus Webb had spent a year of his life trying to find this man. He had never imagined that 10 years later, the man would be the one interviewing him for a job. He kept his face still. He sat down. He answered the first question. 10 years earlier, Marcus was 31 and 3 weeks from starting a new job. It was a senior analyst position at a logistics firm in Denver, a role he had spent 2 years working toward. He had a signed offer letter, a start date, and the particular relief of someone who has finally reached the thing they were aiming for. Then the bank called. Someone had opened 6 lines of credit in Marcus's name over the preceding 4 months. The balances totaled $138,000. There were 2 personal loans he had never applied for, a mortgage inquiry on a property in Phoenix he had never visited, and a credit card with a $14,000 balance at a jewelry store in Scottsdale. The logistics firm ran a background check as standard procedure before his start date. The results came back flagged. The offer was rescinded. What followed was 14 months Marcus did not like to revisit. He filed police reports, disputed every account, and called banks and credit bureaus so often he could recite the hold music. A detective named Yolanda Reyes was assigned to the case that fall. She worked it seriously and, 6 months later, told Marcus honestly that she wasn't giving up, she just had nothing left to chase. His wife Elena stayed through the first year. Then she didn't. She told him it wasn't the money. It was the way he had become someone who could not stop waiting for the next thing to fail. She wasn't wrong. Marcus rebuilt. He moved to Austin. He found steadier work. He rebuilt his credit the way you rebuild anything after a collapse, incrementally, without an audience. By 41 he was good at his job and careful with his life. He still kept the fraud case files in bankers' boxes in his second bedroom. He had moved them 3 times across 10 years. He had never once considered throwing them away. The job posting had come through a recruiter in January. Senior project manager, a software company in Austin, salary range $90,000 to $105,000. Marcus had applied, cleared 2 phone screens, and was now in mid-March sitting in a final round in-person interview on the 32nd floor of a glass building off Congress Avenue. An HR coordinator had shown him to a small conference room and brought him water. She told him Daniel Fossey, the director of operations, would be in shortly. Fossey arrived 3 minutes later. He was about Marcus's height, late 40s, maybe 50. He wore a trim gray blazer and moved with the ease of someone who spent most of his working day in meetings and had learned to make that look effortless. He apologized for being a couple of minutes late, set his notepad on the table, and sat down across from Marcus. He extended his hand. Marcus shook it. The scar was there, a pale crescent of raised skin on the outside of the left hand, between the thumb and the index finger, the kind of mark left by a cut that healed without stitches. Marcus had seen a version of it once before, in a bank surveillance photograph from 10 years earlier, taken at a lending branch in Tucson. A man had walked in using a driver's license that bore Marcus Webb's name and address and someone else's photograph. Detective Reyes had flagged one identifying detail from the branch footage, a pale scar on the outer edge of the left hand. Marcus had studied that photograph so many times that the detail had settled somewhere deep in him and never left. He looked at the man's face. The jaw, the nose, the way he held his pen before he started talking. It was him. Marcus had imagined this before. Not recently, but in the first years after the fraud, in the kind of private silence that follows a serious loss, he had allowed himself the useless fantasy of finding this person. In those versions there was always a confrontation. There was an accounting. Something was said that could not be unsaid. In none of those versions was Marcus in a cushioned chair being offered water and asked to walk the interviewer through his approach to managing cross-departmental projects. He took one slow breath. "Sure," Marcus said, "I can do that." The interview ran 40 minutes. He answered every question. He talked through a supply chain integration he had managed the year before, described how he handled competing priorities across teams, explained his approach to keeping stakeholders aligned through a project's harder phases. He asked 3 of his own questions, about team size, onboarding, how the company ran retrospectives after a project closed. He was composed and thorough. He had been doing this kind of work long enough that the professional performance came nearly without thinking, which was fortunate, because a significant part of his mind was somewhere else entirely. He watched Fosse without appearing to watch him, the way he leaned back when he wanted to seem relaxed, the practiced follow-up question, the way he smiled when something confirmed what he had already decided. There was nothing in Fosse's manner that suggested recognition. He looked at Marcus the way any experienced hiring manager looks at a strong candidate, attentive, evaluating, not particularly curious about who this person actually was outside of this room. When the interview ended, Fosse stood and said plainly, "I want to be direct with you. You're the strongest candidate we've seen for this position. You'll hear from us by Friday." He walked Marcus to the elevator. They exchanged a brief pleasantry about the view from the 32nd floor. Marcus stepped in. The doors closed. He drove home and retained almost nothing about the route. He parked in his building's garage, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark for a while. His hands were steady. He noticed that specifically. He had expected them to shake. He went upstairs and opened the closet in his second bedroom. He pulled out the banker's box marked case files. He set it on the kitchen table and opened it for the first time in 4 years. The detective's contact sheet, the dispute letters, the record of each fraudulent account with the balance written alongside, a page from a credit bureau he had once had to present at a bank in person to prove that the debt was not his. The composite sketch from the Tucson branch footage, a man in a gray jacket, partial profile, the image grainy and inconclusive, the kind of photograph that leads nowhere on its own. And 2 pages of handwritten notes from his last real conversation with Reyes. She had confirmed the thief had appeared in person at the Tucson branch using a fabricated ID. One identifying detail had been visible in the camera footage, a pale scar on the outer edge of the left hand. Marcus sat at the kitchen table. He looked at his own handwriting from 10 years ago. He gave himself 3 days before doing anything. Not because he doubted what he had seen, he had no real doubt. But he had learned something over the years that he hadn't understood at 31. That certainty and right action were 2 separate things, and the gap between them was where people made the kinds of mistakes they couldn't take back. He had already had a year of his life taken from him. He was not going to give more through carelessness. The first day, he wrote down everything he remembered about the interview. The scar, the face, the name on the calendar invitation and on the nameplate outside the conference room. The voice, the way Fosse held his pen. He wrote it all out carefully, then read it back against his own certainty. He also thought about what it would mean if there had been others. A fraud this sophisticated, this well executed, it was not someone's first attempt. If Marcus stayed quiet, he would have the job and the knowledge and nothing else. That thought settled something. On the second day, he ran the name Daniel Fosse through a web archiving service he used occasionally for research. He found a cached professional profile from approximately 15 years earlier, listed under a slightly different first name, associated with a city in Arizona. The photo was small and low resolution, the kind of image uploaded before anyone worried about such things. But the face was consistent. The jaw, the set of the eyes. And in the thumbnail image, barely distinguishable, the pale crescent on the outer edge of the left hand. He printed the screenshot. He added it to the case file folder. On the third day, he thought through each option as clearly as he could. Walk away and say nothing, go directly to the police, confront Fosse himself, or find someone who had already worked the case. He had followed each path to its end. Only one of them felt like doing something real. On Friday morning, an email arrived from Daniel Fosse's work address. The offer letter was attached. $98,000, Senior Project Manager, Health and Dental from day one. The email said the team was genuinely looking forward to having him. Marcus read it once. He closed the laptop. He went back to the kitchen table and found the page in the case file with Reyes's contact information. A direct line in a personal cell she had written for him years ago, with a small note beside it. Call if anything changes. He sat down. He dialed the cell. Reyes answered on the 4th ring. He had not fully expected her to. It had been 7 years since their last conversation, and the number was handwritten in a folder from a different decade. But she answered, and when Marcus said his name, she didn't pause. "I remember your case," she said. I worked it for 6 months. It bothered me when I had to leave it. She was retired now, had been for 3 years. She listened without interrupting as Marcus told her what had happened. All of it, the interview, the scar, the face, the name, the cached profile. He spoke the way he had written in his notebook, carefully, without drama, in the order things had actually occurred. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Don't confront him, she said. Don't give him anything that lets him know you've seen him. Don't do anything that puts him on alert. Marcus said he understood. She asked him to email her the cached screenshot and the identifying details from his case file. She said she had a contact in the financial crimes unit, someone she had worked with for 20 years, someone she trusted. She would make a call that day. She called back 2 hours later. The unit was interested. The evidence was not conclusive on its own, but it was enough to open a formal inquiry. They would need to move carefully and they would need time. They had one request. They asked Marcus if he would be willing to accept the job. He thought about it for less than a minute. Yes, he said. He sent the acceptance email that evening. He thanked Daniel Fossey for the opportunity. He said he was looking forward to joining the team. He wrote every word in a steady, professional tone and then sat back and looked at what he had written. He sent it. His first day was a Monday in early April. He had his badge, his laptop, and a desk on the 29th floor. Fossey's office was 3 floors above. They passed each other in a hallway on Marcus's 3rd day. Fossey nodded and said something easy about settling in. Marcus thanked him. Neither of them stopped walking. The investigation moved in ways Marcus was not told about in detail. He had been asked to act normally, to do his job, to not inquire. He did all 3. He turned out to be genuinely good at the work, not just performing it. He managed a product migration his first month that had been stalled for 2 quarters. His team noticed. He kept his head down and stayed with it. 3 weeks after his start date, he arrived at work to find Fossey's office dark. A message from HR came through by noon. The company was cooperating with an ongoing federal investigation. No further details at this time. Reyes called him that afternoon. 8 victims, she said. Going back 15 years. Different names, different cities, the same pattern. They had other cases. Yours was what connected it. Marcus thanked her. She said she was glad he had called. She sounded like someone who meant it. He went back to his desk. The city spread out below the window, ordinary and indifferent. He thought about Elena for a moment, not with grief, just with the particular weight of time. He thought about the Denver offer letter he had read and reread the day it was rescinded. About the 14 months of hold music and dispute letters and the slow, unobserved work of proving that you are who you say you are. He opened his laptop. He had a meeting in 20 minutes. He had work to do. # story notes. Fictional. Inspired by documented patterns of serial identity fraud cases in which perpetrators operated under altered names across multiple states over extended periods. All names, events, and details are invented.